Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Clint with the Scottish Clans podcast. Thank you for joining me. I have some things today that I hope will be a huge blessing to your effort to understand your ancestral connection to the clans of Scotland, if you have one. And a lot of you who are chiming into this video are already aware of a connection. And some of you have a hint of a connection, but you want to know how to move forward. This is the video for you. I have something that, in my opinion, is non-negotiable that you're going to need to do, and I have something else at the end that I really want you to stay away from and avoid doing. So I recently had a comment in a YouTube video that said, hey, you're taking way too long to get to the point. So today I'm skipping right past a lot of that early stuff, and I'm just going to dive right into it. First of all, I want to compliment you in trying to get to know your ancestors better and just decide what connection do you have to this world of Scottish clans. And I don't know whether it was you watched Outlander or another movie and thought, wow, that's really interesting history. How do I connect? I know I've got some Scottish stuff going on in there somewhere. Or what the impetus was for you to learn this, but I'm excited for you, and I hope that you find value in what I'm about to share with you. So this comes from a question that I see often in our Facebook group called the Scottish Clans Podcast. We have a lot of really knowledgeable people in there who have a lot to offer, some really cool conversations happening, some really good questions. And you have some new people who are coming into this and they just know they've got a little bit to go on and they want to know how to go farther. And the question I see coming up a lot is, what clan am I? What clan am I connected to? I think the best version of that question is, what clan, if any, were my ancestors possibly either connected to or actually a part of? And so what I want to share with you today is how to figure that out. Now, there's two types of people who are usually asking that question. One are people who have had a DNA test recently, and it told them that they were such and such % Scottish. And they, all right, well, where do I fit into that world? 28% Scottish. Or another group of people is mostly a surname-based, the reason for them looking into this. So the DNA or a surname, either their own surname or their mom's maiden name or grandma's, some other line of their family. Maybe their grandmother says, hey, yep, our last name is this, my maiden name is this, and I know we have Scottish, German, and Polish ancestry. Or maybe you looked it up on Google. You said, hey, this is the name I'm wondering about. Where does this name come from? And it says, hey, it comes from Scotland. And you're like, well, all right, let's do this. Let's learn about it and let's connect. So I'm going to share something with you. It's actually going to be pretty simple, but not easy. And you'll see what I mean here in a minute. The main answer, remember there's two things, something to do and not to do. The thing to do, the big thing, this is non-negotiable, is you have to do genealogy. I know that that's hard. I know that that's asking a lot, and I'm not a genealogist, and I have very, very limited ability to help people in this regard. I've studied history. I know the historical context that we're looking into, but genealogy is like, it overlaps with history, but it's its really own separate skill. And so I've had some people reach out to me, and I was like, sorry. But there's no way to get around this. And I'm going to explain why it is so important that you actually trace your line back to a specific place in Scotland. And I'd also push it a little bit further. I would say also to a specific time period. If you trace your line back to, let's say, Glasgow, Scotland in the early 1800s, well, by that point, the Industrial Revolution's kicked off and people are moving all over the place for new job opportunities. They're going to the population centers and they're leaving their ancestral homes for opportunity, greater opportunity. So what you want to try to do is to trace your line not only back to Scotland, but back to a specific place and hopefully to a place where the kin-based society was operational in that area, a time period where that was true. And that looks different in different parts of Scotland. In the Highlands, you have the kin-based society lasted well in maybe the late even early 1800s. I would even say the Highland clearances did a lot more to disrupt the clans than the Battle of Culloden in the 1745 Jacobite Rebellion. The battle actually took place in 1746. A lot of people mark that as the end of the clans. I would say it went farther than that. But then in some places in the lowlands, it might be a lot earlier than that it started to dissipate this really something that we would call a clan. And not even all of the lowlands are the same. So it would matter whether you're tracing your ancestry into the Aberdeenshire area or on the borders of Scotland and England. All that would matter. And the farther back and the more specific in place that you can get, the better. And I know that's hard. It's a hard thing, but hear me out why this is such a non-negotiable thing to do. If you really want to be confident in understanding your ancestors' connection to the Scottish clans. So let's address the DNA crowd first. And this is going to be shorter than talking about the surname crowd. The DNA crowd. So you got a DNA test, and it said let's go back to that 28% example. 28% Scottish DNA. What that's not saying is that 28% of your ancestors come from Scotland. What it is saying is 28% of your DNA looks like Scottish DNA and traces back to there. Now, there's other kinds, and that'd be more like an autosomal DNA test. You can get a Y-DNA test, and you can do a lot with that. But a lot of people do the autosomal DNA test. It says, hey, you're 28% Scottish, you're 15% Slavic, Polish, and it breaks you down. Hopefully it all adds up to about 100%. I'm no math guy. But it's not telling you, you have to understand, it's not telling you that 28% of your ancestors come from Scotland. You might have ancestors that were in England who have Scottish-looking DNA, especially the farther north you go, or in other parts of Scotland. And I've seen this definitely with my own DNA test that I took. So you just have to understand what it is. Now, if you've got another kind of DNA, there are other kind of DNA tests that might be able to plug you in more specifically, like a Y-DNA test or a mitochondrial DNA test. I'm not a genetic expert. I have interviewed one on my podcast, and I've got both the podcast episode from that and the YouTube video content if you want to go check those out. But I'm not the expert on that. Okay, that's all I have to say on, just so you understand what the DNA test does say and what it doesn't say. So you really do have to just trace your line back to Scotland. Now let's talk about surnames. Surnames can be wildly misleading when it comes to understanding what clan you connect to. For one, maybe your surname or one of your ancestors' surnames is a major clan in Scotland. Well, some of those clans are their name is unique to them. Examples of that would be like Macintosh, McFarlane, son of Parlin. Parlin wasn't a really common name. What are some other examples? You might have Buchanan. It was a very unique clan name, kindred name. MacLeod, Maxwell, Agnew, to try to pick from different places in Scotland. You don't see a completely different clan of Maxwells in a different part of Scotland. The Maxwells were a border clan in the western borders, and you don't see any up in the Aberdeen area or up in Caithness or out in the Hebrides that are also called Maxwell and are actually a clan. Yeah, people individually traveled to different parts of Scotland, but as far as a clan, the Maxwells were a western border. So it was unique to that. But then there's other major clan names that there were other clans, actual clans, who had the same name but were not connected. Examples of that would be Mackay. You had Mackays of Strathnaver, Mackays of Ugadale, not coming from the common source that we know about. You have the MacNeils. You had the MacNeils of Barra and the MacNeils of Gia. And Professor Ronald Black wrote a paper on that using the manuscript of 1467 as his kind of base source, and came to the conclusion that those two MacNeil groups are not related. So there is something to consider. Robertson is in the top 20 most common surnames in Scotland list. Robertson. Robertsons were the leading kindred. The Robertsons of Struan were the leading kindred of the Clan Donaghy, or Clan Duncan in English. And so Robertsons all over. So there was those Robertsons of Struan and the Clan Duncan, but there's a lot of Robertsons that were not related to them. You have the MacDougals of Dunolly. But then you have a branch of the Campbells called the Campbells of Craignish, but they also went by MacDougall because they had a famous or a noteworthy ancestor named Dougal Campbell, and they started calling themselves after him instead of using the Campbell surname. You have MacDowell, which is actually linguistically the exact same name as MacDougall, but the MacDowells of Garthland were in the very southwest of Scotland and not connected to the MacDougals of Dunolly. And so if your last name is MacDowell, yeah, you might be the MacDowells of Garthland, or you might just be another pronunciation of the MacDougals of Dunolly. And how do you know? You have to trace your line back. Another example there would be MacIan. You had MacIans of Ardnamurchan. They were a branch of MacDonalds who had a famous or noteworthy ancestor, Ian or John, which is a very common name. And instead of using the MacDonald surname, they started calling themselves after that famous Ian ancestor. And so now you have MacDonalds, but they're MacIans. But then you have another group of MacDonalds that are in Glencoe, and their chiefs are styled MacIan. You can see how murky and confusing the surname landscape of Scotland can be, and using your surname alone to confidently connect into a clan could lead you wrong if that's important to you. It doesn't need to be important to you, but probably you're watching this video because it is important to you. Now, you had major clans that had branches in different parts of Scotland that may or may not have had much connection to each other, but they were actually from the same clan. The Gordons are a great example of this. The main branch become the Earls and later the Dukes of Huntly, but you have a junior branch of them that become the Earls of Sutherland and keep the Gordon last name, but have their own unique history, independent of the Gordons of Huntly, even though they did cooperate with each other. But then you have Gordons clear down in the southern Scotland, which is where they were originally from, and they would have had a much different experience than the ones farther north were having. Another large clan that would have branches all over Scotland are the Campbells. The Campbells, their most southern branch is the Campbells of Loudon, and that's down in Ayrshire in the southwest of Scotland. But then you have their farther north branch was the Campbells of Cotter, and it's a really cool story how they acquired that land. And by cool, I mean interesting, like it'd make a good movie. And so they're geographically widely separated, but in this case, they did cooperate with each other. However, the Campbells of Loudon in the very far south would have maybe had a very different character than the Campbells of Auchnabrek or Ardkinglas. You have the Stuarts. Stuarts are everywhere in Scotland. They're all over the place. And the Stuarts that are in Appin, the Stuarts of Appin, who are a no-kidding Gaelic clan, they legitimately branch off of the royal Stuart, that line, but they settle in the Highlands. They go completely native. So do the Stuarts of Balquidder. So you have those, but they would have had a completely different look and sound than a Stuart in the Edinburgh area. So it all really does matter. Whenever I meet people with the last name Stuart, I'm always very curious to hear which branch of the Stuarts they are from, because it has quite a bit of difference as far as what their ancestors' life was like and the lifestyle and their culture and all that. The Frasers broke into two separate branches, one Highland, one Lowland, and that I can tell they did not have much communication or cooperation with each other. The Grahams, you have one branch of the Grahams of Menteith, who, because we have a government document from 1587 commonly referred to as the Roll of the Clans, in that they are considered a Highland clan. But then you have Grahams down on the border who are border reavers, and nobody more notorious than the Grahams on the border, them and the Armstrongs and the Elliots and Croziers and Nixons and Johnstons in there with the Maxwells I mentioned earlier. So those Grahams would have looked and sounded completely different than their Highland cousins. Completely different. And then my last example from that are the Murrays. You had the Murrays clear up in the very far north in Sutherland, that Clan Sutherland and the Earls of Sutherland used as their to lead their military endeavors, to train the troops, to lead them in combat. The Murrays of Aberscores or Abercross, you can see it two different ways, but that was them. But then you had branches of Murrays that were in the lowlands and were thoroughly lowland people, and so they would have been completely different. So there's, the surname landscape can get completely different. Now I want to address some of you who might not have a surname that's a major Scottish clan. I talked about those who do have a surname that's a major Scottish clan to let you know that you can't just, because it is a major, even a Highland clan, you can't just be like, oh, well, these are my ancestors. It can get confusing. So it's back to you people who have a surname or an ancestor's surname that is not a major Scottish clan, but it is a Scottish surname. So where do you go from this? Once again, you have to do the genealogical research. You have some that don't look like a Highland clan, like one of the major clan names, but actually is. McConnell sounds more like the actual Gaelic version of MacDonald. And I won't go into all the linguistics of why that is, but McConnell is MacDonald. McConaughey is the son of Duncan. So are we talking about the clan Duncan, the chiefs of which were styled Robertson of Struan? Or are we talking about a branch of the Campbells of Inverrah, who are also known as the sons of Duncan, or McConaughey? See, it doesn't sound, Duncanson or MacDuncan or just the surname Duncan doesn't sound like Conaughey or Donaghy, which possessive would be McConaughey or McConkey or McConaughey, like Matthew McConaughey. It doesn't sound like it, but it is one of the major Scottish clan surnames. MacArthur is the son of Farquharson. So you have, it doesn't look the same, but it is actually the name. Okay, but let's actually get to those of you who really, really don't have we're not talking about a surname that's a major Scottish clan. So what do? You go to a Wikipedia website, you go to a jewelry website, maybe even a kilt manufacturer or sales website, a kilt company, and you check out their list of Scottish septs from the major clans, and that's how you find out, right? This is where we come to the thing that I really, really hope you don't do. And when I say that, I don't mean I hope you don't look at those lists. They're useful. But if that forms the thing that's forming your complete concept of who your ancestors were and what clan they were associated with, what language they spoke, how they dress, all of that, you could be way off. Because in this group of people who have a surname that's not a major Scottish clan, you have these sept lists. And I'm sponsored by a kilt company, USA Kilts, shout out. And they do have, if you're trying to pick out a tartan, they do have, okay, this is Clan Cameron, and here's all the septs. And you'll see in that list of names, Taylor. And yes, there really were Taylors associated with Clan Cameron. But by no means was every Scot, let alone all of the Englishmen with the last name Taylor, connected to the Clan Cameron. There are many who weren't. You need to trace your line back. Another example of that would be Wilson. Were there Wilsons who were part of Clan Gun? Absolutely there were. But that is in the top 3 most common surnames in all of Scotland as of 2023. And this is being filmed in early 2025. So clearly not all the sons of Will, there might have been many of them who haven't even heard of Clan Gun, let alone an actual sept of theirs. A sept is any family who came underneath the umbrella of that clan, whether they are actually related or a completely different kindred, but were on their lands and so answered their calls when they went to battle. Whatever it was, that would be a sept. And some of the Wilsons were a sept of Clan Gun, and many of them were not. So if all you're using is that list of septs and you're like moving forward with that, and it's fine if you're doing that as long as you know that it's that you're doing. But if you are actually trying to get an honest-to-goodness, accurate picture in your head of your ancestors, that is not good enough. It can give you a clue where to look, but it is not good enough. So please do not just settle into these clan lists and be like, oh, there we are under Clan Gordon, so we're Gordons, and you might be going completely wrong by doing that. And I've met people from various surnames, and this is exactly what they've done. Now, if you like the tartan, you think it looks cool, and your name on their list of septs is good enough, then knock yourself out. I'm not into making all these rules around what you're wearing and not wearing and all that. What I want you to do, though, is know what you're doing. And I want you to know your ancestors. I want you to get to know them. Because regardless of, like some of you might be like, I want my ancestor to be Highland. Because that's where all the icons of Scottish culture come from. That's where the kilt comes from, the Highland pipes, the Gaelic language. Well, we actually could go wrong there. Southwest Scotland in the lowlands had Gaelic for quite a while, so did some other places. But I want you to get to know your ancestors. And no matter what part of Scotland they're coming from, no matter what part of the world they're coming from, but we're talking about Scotland specifically, no matter what part of Scotland they're coming from, there's cool things in their history. You should be proud of your ancestors. Even if they were rogues, you should be just thrilled to get to know these people. And I want to help that. And I hope this has been helpful for you. So do your genealogy. Don't rest completely on those clans and sept lists. They're on so many different websites. Yes, they're helpful. No, they are not the end of your journey, genealogically speaking. If you want to know and dive into this subject even more, you want to really immerse yourself in this, go over to scottishclans.info. I have some links over there, like these books that are behind me on this shelf. I have Amazon links to them that you could go, and these have been really helpful to me. I've got some links to free PDF stuff on there, other documents that have been very helpful. I also have some of my own messed around with Google Maps and have plotted things out on there, and that could be very helpful. I'm a very visual learner, and so I did it actually for me to start off with, and then I was like, oh, maybe some other people would like this too. So I've got some links over there. Those are all free. Go over and check that out. You can contribute to the cause over there. And outside of me, if you're interested at all in planning a trip to Scotland the next year and you want to include Bruce Fumi with Scotland History Tours, you may have seen some of his awesome YouTube content, then check the email address in the show notes and reach out to Scotland History Tours and find out what they've got going on this coming year and match something up with your vacation. I guarantee you will not regret it. Once again, I hope this has been helpful for you. If you want to reach out to me, it's thescottishclans@gmail.com. Mar sin leven drasta.